My name is Michael Garner. I'm the general manager for Haas Factory Outlet. We sell and service Haas CNC machine tools built in America. It's America's #1 machine tool provider and manufacturer. And you might wonder, well, why is that important to us? Why is an opportunity like this important to us when we're more in a sales and service environment? It's because this is the need that my salesmen and my service techs hear on a daily basis. They hear from people like Pace Industries, one of our customers here in Arkansas, Baldor Corporation. Those are two of our larger manufacturing employers in the state, but they also hear from the local job shops. The shops like Precision Mold Welding here in Little Rock, Arkansas, where in 1989 I got my start. And it started for an opportunity to work while going to college, but what quickly turned into a love for manufacturing and work with my hands. So I stand here before you to tell you that you can make a difference by introducing a child, a young person, someone needing to be re-engaged in the workforce. You do have an opportunity, and it does just take one to change the world. So with that, I want to introduce our next speaker, Ted Abernathy. Ted, in 2013, was named Economic Development Policy Advisor to the Southern Governors Association, where he's developing a new research policy agenda for the southern states and leading public input process for reimagining higher education. A lot of Ted's public input comes from forums like this. Ted has a quite lengthy bio, which you can read. He's also launched an economic consultancy, Economic Leadership, LLC. But probably the most important thing, I had the opportunity to talk to Ted last night, and I said, Ted, I need some dirt. I need to know what to tell him about you. And probably the most important thing Ted said was, tell him I come from 4 generations of textile manufacturing workers. So with that, I give you Ted Abernathy.
Good morning. So if we can get the first slide up, we'll get started. You know, it's a big crowd, and it echoes when you talk up here and bright lights. So everybody's been sitting for about 2 hours. So everybody stand up for a minute. Just stand up, shake, get yourself all out. If I shake, this thing falls off my ear, but everybody else just sort of, okay. So everybody who thinks that workforce is important, sit down. Sit down if you think it's important. See, I thought that would work to get you back in your seats. This morning I'm going to be talking to you about 3 major research projects and sort of what they mean in the state of Arkansas. I'm lucky enough to be working with Randy and his staff on a new state strategic plan in Arkansas. And I'm finishing up a workforce plan for Perry Webb up in Springdale and starting to work in northwest Arkansas with the council on their strategy. So I spent a lot of time in Arkansas. I was here a few weeks ago for the Southern Governors Association, and some of you may have seen me talk a little bit about higher ed. We're going to talk about reimagining workforce today. It's a topic that we've been doing with the Delta Regional Authority all across the South. We're also going to talk about something called Innovation 2.0, which is a reimagination of how higher education can play a bigger role in the economic development world. And we're going to be talking about shaping our future. It's a higher education reimagination done for the Kettering Foundation and the National Issues Forum. And I'm sorry to say that unlike Jennifer, I don't have anything profound to say to you today. I wish I did. Except maybe that all the things we used to think we all knew just aren't true anymore. They've all changed. And in our world today, change is the biggest thing we have to deal with. The world's different. The economy, I'm an economist, the economy is different than it used to be. Arkansas's economy is different than it used to be. You're going to see some slides today on economics. The workforce is different. Y'all all talk sometimes about, I wish they were like they used to be, except that you want all the new stuff too. What we expect out of our workforce is higher than it used to be. What they expect out of their companies is also higher. And the change that's happening today is happening at a faster rate than ever before. So those are my grandparents. This was taken the day I came home from the hospital in 1957. I don't know why my grandfather has a gun on his belt. I have no idea. I like the picture. I don't understand the gun. No one can tell me. But Roy and Margaret were my mom's parents, and Wade and Janora were my dad's parents, and all four of them were textile workers. The two on the left worked for Bonnet in Dallas, North Carolina. The two on the right worked for J.P. Stevens in Stanley, North Carolina. It was the first job any of them had ever had. They were all farmers before that. No one ever graduated high school, never needed to. In fact, Roy got to the second grade before he dropped out of school to go to work. Everybody lived in a town of 3,000 or less, and they lived in a farm outside a town of 3,000 or less. And nobody ever had a passport, ever saw a computer, ever had a cell phone, ever bought a foreign car. And these are my grandparents who died when I was in college, all four of them. This is 2 generations ago in the South. This is what workforce was 2 generations ago in the South. It was people coming off the farm, getting their first job, working with their hands. They didn't need an education. They didn't need to live in a big city. They didn't need to be technologically savvy. And they lived a middle-class life. You know, my grandfather had a new LTD every 3 years. You know, that was what life was back then. Now, how many of you, that sort of sounds like the South that you knew growing up, right? Yeah, that was your world. Well, today, we are in the midst of a group of trends that are global in nature, that are rippling through our world. That we can't help it. It's no different than being on a boat and watching a big one go by and the wake hitting you. Can't do anything about it. Some of those trends are profound, especially in the South. One of those is urbanization. And I tell people I think it is we'll talk about globalization and technological change, but we don't talk about urbanization as much in the South. And our development patterns are such that it's had a bigger impact on the way we live our lives than just about anything. We're living in a country today where 80% of everybody lives in a metropolitan area. Where 60% of those people live in metro areas of 1 million or more. Where 90% of the gross domestic product of the country is in metros and 86% of all the jobs, and yet we have thousands and thousands of small towns trying to figure out their place in a new world. What's happening is this is intensifying. This chart shows size on the left side. The bigger the place, the faster the growth. The smaller the place, the smaller the growth. And when you look nationally, the colored counties on this chart are shrinking. If you look at Arkansas, you can see the center part of the state where Little Rock's growing, the northwestern part of the state where northwest Arkansas is growing, and a lot of places starting to shrink, and you can see that all over our country. In fact, if you want to hammer home urbanization, these 146 counties of the 3,100 in some counties are half the U.S. population today. Half the population of our country lives in the blue area. Now, that's a policy maker's nightmare. How do you spread wealth when wealth is concentrating? How do you spread jobs when jobs are concentrating? How do you get people to want to stay in their communities when the jobs are being created other places? And this is true in Arkansas, and it's true in Missouri, and it's true in Alabama, and it's true in my home state of North Carolina. When you look at southern states, Arkansas has more of its people living in, these are small cities and rural areas, 61% in Arkansas. You're one of the leaders in the South. You still have a lot of people in small towns here. What do you do with it? How do you create an economy that helps all of those people? GDP in the metro areas, Arkansas is only 70%. I said that nationally we're at 90. You can see a lot of states, almost all of their GDPs in the urban area, but you've got about 30% in the non-urban area. And if you break that out a little bit, you can see that non-metro area is 31% in Arkansas. Little Rock's about a third. Northwest Arkansas about 20%. The other metro is about 20%. And outside the metro area is about 30%. It's having an impact. on our country because young people move where the jobs are. They also move where the excitement is and all those other things. And then grandparents move where their grandkids are, and all of a sudden you have this self-reinforcing that moves around. This is what southern states are doing for 22 to 44-year-olds, that young population that everybody's chasing. You can see the big bar on the right side is Texas. Everybody young moving to Texas now. You can see Florida gets its big share. Nationally, because of demographics, we're losing about 2% overall. Arkansas is doing a little better. Your urban areas have been able to attract some young people. My guess is your rural areas haven't been able to attract as much. But you can also see what this chart shows is lots of winners and lots of losers. As young people move around the country, this urbanization is changing the face of economics as we move forward. Everybody how many people in the room have a smartphone with them today? Raise your hand. How many of you have been on it during the course of the morning so far? How many of you are on it right now? Come on, go ahead. All right, tweet about me. It's okay. It's good. I can trend. I can be cool to my kids. Technological shifts have changed all of us, changed every industry in this room. For every business in this room, technology has rewritten you and does so all the time. McKinsey wrote a report on disruptive technologies and just what technology is doing to the energy sector, the advanced material sector. Mobile internet is just crazy. Genomics about to change health completely, robotics, cloud computing. There is no industry that isn't being impacted by technology, and there's no people not being impacted. How many of you looked at that cell phone this morning before you took a first drink of coffee? Come on. Look at this. It's crazy. Think about that. You're technologically plugged in every minute of the day. This is the probability that a robot will take your job in the next 20 years. Any accountants in the room? My wife's an accountant. This says it'll take her job. She says you can have it. It's just... In the middle there are economists. I'm about 50-50. I have no chance, really. The goal is to try to get past that. This is the Economist magazine's report. Technology is having dual impacts on us. New things are creating new industries every day and creating jobs, and yet technology destroys jobs as fast, and so the goal is to try to stay ahead of that game. This is a new quote that came out. The most frightening thing to our parents is that the best educated humans will compete with those machines, and yet today, when we think about K-12 education and college, we're doing an industrial model in many places still. I'm sure there's some enlightened places in the room that are doing a better job of this, but the idea that we would teach a whole group of people how to do the exact same task the same way, well, that's an industrial model. That's not today's model. And yet we're trying to keep kids who can think and problem solve, do all those things. We haven't caught up with that. Technology also makes the world smaller. This is an African city. There's no paved roads, but all the kids have iPads. My favorite quote on this is that in India today, 90% of the citizens have access to a mobile phone and 40% have access to a flush toilet. Technology skips things. It makes, if Jim Clifton's book is right, we've got about 1 billion more people looking for work today than we have jobs. Makes it tough. So when we look at reimagining workforce development, we start looking at how do we reimagine readiness? How do we reimagine and engage learners and disconnected youth? Basically, how do you get everybody involved? And what about the relationships and the resources? So when we're talking about readiness, we're really talking about 4 things. The first is, how do you strengthen the connection between educators and job skills? And, we can have a debate, and some of you I've moderated quite a few of these debates where we decide if educators actually are teaching job skill training. Just humor me today and just assume that you are teaching some things like that. We know that college freshmen think you are. If in college, the percentage of freshmen that are reason they win is to get a better job is over 88%. They don't, my kids might have gone to college for the experience, but I sent them to college so they'd get a better job, right? So how do you make that stuff relevant? Employers say they want the ability to work in a team. These are the top list this year. Ability to work in a team, make decisions, plan, organize, communicate verbally, process information. So for everybody who likes to vilify a liberal arts degree, you need a liberal arts degree. You just need it by the end of high school, right? Because you want all this, and philosophy majors are perfect for this. So we want that as a prerequisite. We want a liberal arts degree as the prerequisite before you learn useful skills, right? And what we say? We did a study for Durham, North Carolina. We talked to several hundred employers. We gave them a list of 60 types of skills and values that were important. And we thought we were going to be cute and said, for jobs that pay under $12 an hour, what's important? For jobs that pay $12 to $20 an hour, what's important? And for jobs that pay over 20, what's important? We thought we were going to come up with a nice, cute, nobody's published this kind of thing before. And it turns out that employers want the exact same thing from all their employees. They want honesty and integrity. They want dependability. They want a positive attitude and energy for the job. And they want a work ethic. Okay. That's, what's the curriculum for this? Well, how many, if there's an 8th grade teacher in the room and you know this curriculum, come up and see me afterwards because I want to hear about it. It is, there's a new study out today that say that 58% of human resource directors say that soft skills are more important than hard skills. Maybe they are. This is a chart that I made up. The quote at the source at the bottom, which is cut off by the way these projectors work, says that I made this up, there's no source. So here's the question. Well, there's no source. Is the demand of business rising faster than the ability of our workers to acquire skills? How many employers in the room? Come on, raise your hand. I know Randy has a bunch of you. How many of you want more than you can get? Okay. Well, at least they're honest. Think about this. Everybody in this room has abilities, and we all have ceilings. And my wife tells me routinely that I'm only so smart, right? So if you need me to be smarter, then how do I qualify for the job? Now, if you need me to work harder, maybe I can do that. If you need me to be more honest, maybe I can do that. But if you need me to have more skills, have we set a bar too high? I think the answer is no. But I think that's because we don't teach it the right way. We've got to rethink what those credentials are. Jennifer talked a lot about credentials. And, we are moving to a world where more and more people, this is high school graduation, completion rate, more and more people have high school degrees. More and more people have college degrees. And yet every time I talk to employers, you say people don't have the skills that we want them to have. We know college cost is soaring, so the odds that more people are going to be able to afford college in the short run is not good. But we do know that the more education you have, the lower your unemployment rate and the higher your wages. It's a fact. It's a good fact, right? The real question is, what kind of skills and credentialing do you need? So some of you have heard me talk before, so I'd ask you not to cheat on this, but what percentage of jobs in America in the year 2022, out of ways, will require a bachelor's degree to qualify for their jobs? So everybody stand up. Well, everybody up. So I want you to watch everybody in the room. So if you think this number is more than 60%, sit down. If you think it's more than 50%, sit down. If you think it's more than 40%, sit down. Jane, you're going to cheat today. I know, because you told me this. Do you think it's more than 30%? Sit down. 25%? Sit down. So look around the room at all the people standing up. Now, if you've heard me do this talk before, sit down. There's a few cheaters in the room. So the answer is 23%. By the year 2020, will need a BA to qualify for their job. An additional 12% will need a certificate or AA, post-high school credentials. Everybody else will need more skills, but they won't need the current way we measure academic credentials. This is Bureau of Labor Statistics. So this is the best we've got for projections right now. Now, that doesn't sound right to my ears either. Because what I hear is that every child needs to go to college. And I'm not anti-college, so don't, all you college people, don't come and beat me up afterwards. But this is what the economy's generating right now. I'd love for the economy to generate more jobs at the higher end. But this is the projections we've got right now, is that it will generate this. A whole lot of people with high school degrees, but everybody with a minimum, everybody's going to have to be able to read and write and problem solve, show up for work. We talked at our table before that high school dropout's okay, but they've got to have skills. And so the credentialing becomes the interesting thing going forward. How do we credential? How many of you today as employers test for some level of skill before you hire people? Right. You're already doing credentialing. You're just self-doing it. Jennifer explained that there are programs right now to credential. So if let's just say that in the 8th grade you were, brilliant and decided you were too smart for high school and dropped out. But you can weld and you can do math and you can do all the things. I'm not suggesting that I want anybody to drop out of school. But I am predicting for you that, and we do a lot of work in futurism, that within 25 years, how you measure credentials will be completely different than it is today. There will be stackable, verifiable skill levels that you're going to have going in. And if it's not business community, it'll be the education community or somebody else that will develop a whole new series. And a grade level one isn't it. Neither is a BA, by the way. A BA from pick your school that you don't like compared to a BA from MIT doesn't tell an employer you have the same skill set. Credentials will change. As southern states go, bachelor's degrees, Arkansas is pretty low, even for the 23% that you need more people going to college anyway. But some states, much higher. And some regions, my home region, the Research Triangle in North Carolina, is almost 50% of the adults have a BA. Educated industries have started clustering pretty closely. It creates a different pool. This is advanced degrees, and again, Arkansas is behind. Part of this is your mix of employers. But a lot of it is that you're losing some of your best and brightest. As they get the degree, they move somewhere else. And you've got to do a better job of retaining them to be competitive in the long run. All STEM degrees are not equal. We've shorthanded the future into STEM's great and everything else isn't. We don't have near enough people with mathematics degrees or computer science degrees. We have a ton more people than we currently need with BAs in social sciences, but also more in physical science and health science with BAs. We have a lot fewer than we need with AAs and certificates. Sounds a little bit like my knees, but not quite. Projected growth going forward is a lot of growth in associates, a lot of growth in masters, less growth in other places. And the group on the right, with the green, the reason that their growth numbers are slower but they're still there is that so many more people have jobs that require less today. So their growth rate's slower, but the raw numbers are still high. I love this cartoon. It's sad but true. This fall I'm going to a trade school to be a welder. The other guy thinks he's a loser. He's going to start at $50,000. The other person's going to start at 25 with his degree. Now, again, I've got nothing against higher ed. Both my kids went to college. But as parents, if you ask, just like Jennifer mentioned, 70% of parents don't want a manufacturing job for their kids. They want their kids to be successful. I don't know how you measure it. I told my kids I wanted them to be happy and self-sufficient. Those are my two things. Now, I don't care what you do. My brother has a college degree. My mother made him go. He has an accounting degree. He never used it, and he's a master stonemason, and he's a really good one. And he makes a lot more money than anybody ever dreamed of, making stone pizza ovens for bank executives in Charlotte. And he has a boat, and he takes 10 weeks off a year to deer hunt, and. He seems a pretty happy guy to me. My mother's happy because there's a diploma, which he gave to her. It sits in her house, not his. And she has a very nice pizza oven also, so works out well for everybody. How do we get students? Every employer we ever talk to says we need people who have more exposure to work. We need people who understand the economy. How do we get more exposure to work? Well, first of all, we've got to understand the economy a little bit. We live in a world where there used to be creative jobs and more routine jobs. And the routine jobs started getting cut out because we automated and because we outsourced. And so we lost a lot at the bottom. Well, now we're starting to lose creative jobs because of software and outsourcing also. I mean, think about today, the software. I'm sure there's lawyers in the room. I won't ask you to identify yourself because y'all are sitting at tables. I don't know if you realize this, but they organized your tables. You know, so every table is supposed to have some employers at it, but also some educators at it. Did y'all know? Did you have any idea why you got your little table number? So they want y'all to talk to each other more, try to get to know each other. Well, so when you talk about creative work today, I mean, we're cutting some of that out. We're cutting it so that eventually the bar will look like everybody has creative work and almost nobody has routine work. Because even in your manufacturing plants, you don't want people to be rote. I mean, a machine can do rote. You want them to be thinking all the time. Improvement. As we change, as new inventions come on, we're going to be changing every business again. And that little light bulb in the middle's had a hard impact on those other light bulbs. And that's true of all of our businesses. This is employment growth over the last 12 months. It's August to August, and you can see Arkansas is in the middle. For those of you in the back, you're the second one from the left. So you're at 1.5% growth, doing better than Alabama or Maryland or Mississippi or Virginia, West, sort of in the middle of the pack. You can see the big growth, Texas, and Texas has continued to be the big grower. Florida's a little bit of a misnomer. It's the second fastest growth up there, but it had the most job losses during the recession. So they're not even back to where they were yet. They're growing fast again, but they're not back to where they were. The more interesting thing is where the jobs have been. This top map shows that if you're in the yellow there, that you were a predominant manufacturing state in 1990. In the bottom, the blue says you're a predominant healthcare state. In sort of one generation, half a work life, if you will, the types of jobs changed dramatically. And we all know that there are different skill sets and different gender preferences, all sorts of things with those types of jobs. So when we look at the South, a few things. This is a percent. This is the Southern states' percent of manufacturing as employment percentage in 2012. You can see that Arkansas, this time it's the third, is the highest percent manufacturing in the South. And if you start looking at that, you can see that we're up and down. The whole South is not a manufacturing bed. A bunch of places are. But the share of output for the overall manufacturing share of output has, over the last 10 years, dropped pretty dramatically in Arkansas. You're still real strong, but you've had a lot of job losses over the last 10 years. This is employment change over the last 12 months. Again, middle of the pack, you're at 2.4% growth. So you've stabilized, and I think if the Manufacturing Institute put up numbers, they would show that 600,000-700,000 net new jobs over the last year or so in manufacturing coming back. We lost a lot in the recession, but a strong comeback. And I don't think anybody ever thought we'd come back. I don't think we thought we'd change that number. And you've got a chance here, a real strong chance in Arkansas to bring a lot of those numbers back. If you look at this is business and professional services, which is the fastest growth area in the country, and You can see 7% growth in my native North Carolina. That's where most of the jobs are coming from there. If you'd have noticed a minute ago in manufacturing, we haven't grown all that much. But you guys, not so much here. Those are those white-collar jobs. Again, reflection of your education levels and the types of industries you have. But this is a real opportunity for the state moving forward. Then finally, government employment. And most of the states have been losing government jobs. Arkansas has been shrinking its government job base. There's a misnomer that government jobs have all been growing everywhere, and that's not true. Most states have been cutting back some. You can see a couple states in the blue have grown a little bit, and Texas is the fastest growing, and that's driven by population growth. More and more school kids and teachers and all of that. Since the recession ended, what we've been doing is growing. This is a chart. I think this will work. This is a chart that shows the number of jobs running along the horizontal axis and the pay scale of the jobs running up the vertical axis. And what you can see is we've been generating a lot of jobs in our country down here that are lower pay, but a lot of them. And there's three basic areas, occupational areas. They're administrative services, food prep, and sales. And those three areas in our current economy in the country are a third of all of our jobs. 49 million of our 141 million are in those three areas, and we've been generating a lot of jobs there. They don't pay a lot. And that's why you're seeing some of the wage growth and other things being stifled. Up here is business and professional services. And then the job loss areas are in state, federal, and local government and information technologies. And information technology is not because the output's not growing. It's because we're more efficient in that field than anywhere else. I tell people the story, and we did the state plan in North Carolina like we're doing for Randy here a while back. And in North Carolina, between 2000 and 2012, the state lost 42% of its manufacturing jobs. Sounds horrible. Everybody, manufacturing's gone. Well, actually, manufacturing GDP went up during that period of time. Output was up because of mechanization and efficiencies. So when we start looking at jobs and output now, we try to tell people they should be looking at job numbers and growth numbers together because they're both part of the local economy. This is real wage change, though. We have had a time in our country where wages have been pretty depressed. This is adjusted for inflation, as you can see in Arkansas, a little better than the rest of the states, but your overall real wages are down about 8%. So a lot of families who say they're hurting are hurting. You know, this is real times in America. And this is per capita GDP. Again, this is one of your real strengths. Your economy has been growing here. Your business has been strong. And so output has been real high. We're all faced with a time where technology, as we reimagine readiness for individuals, has changed just dramatically. So think about MOOCs and virtual learning and Khan Academies. And I mean, how do you get more information? How do you learn something? I want you to think about this this afternoon and this evening. If you wanted to learn something, where would you go? What would you do? If you wanted to teach your employees something, how would you do it? We've got lots of opportunities today, but they're changing rapidly. The second big area is the fact that we've got kids who drop out of school or get out of school and get out of the labor force, and we have older workers, and I'm supposed to say older workers over 40, and I've reached the age where that's just a terrible thing to say, so I won't say it, But there are a lot of people who have been in your companies whose skills are no longer needed for the jobs that are there. So they're 45 years old, and their skills are outdated. Now, is there anybody here who would like to support them for the rest of their lives? They don't want to be supported either. But our current systems are not as geared toward the 40-year-old going back to get educated again. You know, the education academies, the training academies that a lot of people talk about, they have to be there for the dislocated worker or the disenfranchised worker to re-up their skills. We seem to like to pay for 20-year-olds to get educated, but we don't like to pay for 40-year-olds to get educated. And, you know, the data would show those 40-year-olds are going to work for 30 more years. They're part of society too. So as we think about education and training as a state, we need to think about it holistically, not just what do you do for the 18-year-old or the 16-year-old or the 20-year-old, but what do you do until they're done learning? And so there's got to be a retargeting for people with skills, with credentials. We've got to help them rejoin the workforce. Unemployment rates for youth are very high in America, and a whole lot of them make up part of what Randy said before about the low participation rate. We have a lot of 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds that are sitting in your basement somewhere. How many people have a 20-year-old living at their house right now? Come on. Yeah. I mean, do you want them there? I didn't ask if your wife wanted them there. I asked if you wanted them there. So, everybody wants them to work, right? So we've got to do a better job at those transitions. We also have to create a continuity, and this gets me in trouble with every group, so I'll just say it, and y'all can be mad at me. But if we're going to have a workforce system that trains workers, there has to be a continuity between the players. You cannot have a workforce system where you graduate 12th grade and more than half the people aren't prepared for 13th. You cannot have, it's not a system if when you graduate high school, you are not ready for first year of community college. You also can't have a system when you graduate high school where you're not ready for a job that needs you to have the skills that you graduate high school with. Same is true of college. There's got to be a continuity there. It would be my goal that everybody graduating high school doesn't need remediation in college first year. I mean, it's not a system otherwise. And, we can have a long discussion about how right it is to make people get to pay again for stuff that they thought they had just learned. I understand dropout rates and how all this works, and I understand how the numbers work, but we still need to find some continuity in that system. And you need to know, you were talking about measurements before, and the governor talked about them too. I mean, degrees, credentials, they need to mean something. They need to mean something quantifiable. When you ask people, and I was an economic developer for 30 years, ran the Research Triangles area for a decade. When you ask today what drives investment decisions, the availability of skilled workers is number one. It's a number one thing. So if we want to be competitive, at what we think drives states' success is economic competitiveness, you are going to have a demonstrated way of having skilled workers. One of the ways to do that is to engage your higher education in more innovation. Innovation 2.0 was the last book that Southern Growth helped sponsor. And Lou Terensky wrote a repeat of it. We had written the book 15 years earlier, and he did a new one called Innovation 2.0. And what we heard from universities, the overarching theme was, universities do education and research, but more and more of them are figuring out how to play a bigger role in economic development, especially in their states and their regions. Some of the takeaways were that commercialization comes from top leadership. Universities, and it's great to have a professor that cares about this, but unless your chancellors and your presidents care, it's not going to work. Then it has to be pushed down through all levels of a university. It's not, the engineering department gets to play in this space. This is everybody. We found that commercialization is what people talk about in licensing, but there's a whole bunch of things that are part of an entrepreneurial university, and most of them end up being cross-discipline, which means that deans have to talk to each other, and engineering has to work with the medical students so that you get medical devices. And you just keep going down this line. Those are very clear in the places work. The book highlighted 12 universities that were very different all across the country that were making a difference. There needs to be a point of contact for business. When a business in Arkansas wants to talk to the University of Arkansas about what they can do together, there has to be a place to go. And the student entrepreneurship, the data shows that half of us will be working for ourselves inside 30 years. So we need to teach entrepreneurship across all platforms. When we did a conference on this, some of the themes that emerged were that young faculty were better at this than old faculty. Sorry if you're old faculty in the room, but that young faculty was really energized by this. And diffused economic entrepreneurial ecosystems were better. Entrepreneurship added to knowledge. The mission of a university to push knowledge was really driven by it having a privatization model within it. International was important for all the students. And then, we were looking for new funding models in universities. The traditional, we pay you for a student in the seat model, or even the student graduating model, wasn't it. It needed to be partnerships. A lot of the universities that are doing a good job in this have business university partnerships for business activities. When Southern Growth did an innovation report a couple years ago, we looked at what were the innovation policies that really drove states to have new ideas and new businesses. And some of those were around world-class faculty and centers, tax credits for angel investors and venture capitalist funds, tax and regulation that encourage company formation. If you've got a tax system that penalizes entrepreneurs and first-time investors and all, they're going to go somewhere else. They can and they will. Finally, when we did a project for the Kettering Foundation in Ohio and the National Issues Forum on reshaping higher ed, we heard a lot of themes about what the future of higher ed should be or ought to be. Most of it's normal stuff. I mean, colleges ought to give a rich, diverse education to all of their students, but it ought to be practical. They're going out into the real world the next year. And I don't think that philosophy's not practical, by the way. I mean, if you sit in a class and you debate philosophical choices, because strategy, when you get into your businesses, when you do strategic planning, and we do it for a bunch of businesses, strategic planning is never listing. It's about making choices. So understanding how you make choices and how philosophically things are judged against each other is a good thing to do. But how do you make it practical for students? Science and technology are critical, but we don't have near enough people wanting to go into science and tech. You know what the number one answer is when you ask them why? It's hard. So as a parent, if your child gets a B in organic chemistry or an A in introduction to recreational science, which are you more proud of? I mean, if you tell your kid you got to make all A's, what are they going to take? The hard stuff or the easy stuff? I'll tell you right now, if they've got a math degree, they're going to find a job and it's going to pay them well. And college is too costly. When we did the forum, and some of you were there at the Southern Governors Association, a lot of our community colleges and higher ed said one of their issues was there wasn't enough money. I get it, but we also said, how many of you expect there to be more money? And the answer was nobody. And that's true in every state. So if there's no more money, how do we deliver services at a less costly way? It's a real problem. The average family in America has about $55,000 in total savings. They cannot afford to send their kids to college if college costs $200,000. Debt's $1 trillion now. They cannot afford to borrow either. So I'm just a math guy, and in the end, math says that college costs are going to come down. Everybody ought to go to college, but we also need to really tell people what it is that their opportunities are without a 4-year degree. Maybe it's a 2-year degree, maybe a certificate, maybe it's a PhD with some other stuff attached to it. And I understand that when they get to college day one, if they haven't had a strong parent, strong middle school, strong elementary school, strong everything else, that the product you get is not ready sometimes. So you've got to have the whole community behind this. There's a lot of risk ahead as we move into an era where the change is so rapid and the money is tight. When we think about it, we think that you've got to sort of accept that there are certain trends within your context. The first is that we're looking at a pretty long period probably of slow to middle slow growth in America and the world. Since World War II, we've been averaging about 3.4% annual GDP growth. Well, we're not anywhere near that, and we're now in year 5.5 of the recovery. And we're starting to talk about when's the next downturn, not when's the next upturn. Globally, if you look around the world, both Brazil and Russia, who were two of the BRIC countries, are under 1% GDP growth. And China and India, that used to be running double digits for decades, are now in the 7%. Globally, because of population growth and other things, the whole GDP race has slowed down. So we're going to be living in a world where it's not rapid growth, but intense competition. The technological change will continue. Is there anybody in the room who thinks that technology shifts are going to slow down? I mean, I'm going to make you all sort of amateur futurists today, okay? I mean, anybody disagree with technology going to rapidly change? Is there anybody that disagrees that we're going to have more globalization, more urbanization, and more winners and losers, unevenness of growth? Remember, you're becoming futurist. You're going to go home and tell your wife and your children and your husband. We're getting older because we can. That's the good news. Everybody goes, oh, we're getting older. That's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. And we're going to be more and more diverse. Government budgets are going to be tight for the foreseeable future at all levels of government. Anybody disagree with that? We are going to be figuring out how to do more with less for the foreseeable future. I can't find anybody who wants something different that makes sense. At the same time, personal budgets are going to also be tight for the foreseeable future. We're going to be looking as families across America. 90% of American families have seen their buying power decrease over the last decade. They are going to be looking for more for less or less for less. Our military is transitioning. So if you're in a place where that has military, we will have fewer people in uniform moving forward. We'll have more technology and fewer people in uniform, and that will make a big difference. If you're a place they're building the technology, yay, you win. If you're a place that's built on lots of boots on the ground, tough. Business is completely reordering. The sharing economy is changing what it is you buy. Kids under 35 today say they want experiences, not stuff. So the service industry side of things will continue to increase, but the manufacturing of experiences will continue to go up. And then finally, we will continue. More places are becoming more competitive as we move forward. I mean, if you think about, and I think you heard from several people today, we compete with everybody. The line is Arkansas competes with everybody every day for everything and every job. So there are a lot of communities who have been down who are trying to get back. There are communities that have started from the bottom that are trying to rise up. And if you go around the world, if you travel much, there are a lot of people, a lot of places that would love to have every business that lives in Arkansas. That also like to have every piece of talent that lives in Arkansas. They want every young manufacturing worker to come work for them. They want every new graduate from the University of Arkansas to move to their place. You will compete, and you will compete based on what it is you build as a quality of place, a quality of a place to do business, and a quality of life for your citizens. Without those things, you cannot compete. You will lose. Because your roots are deep, many of you, deep into Arkansas. But the next generation's roots, not so much. As a group, they look around. They see where the excitement is, where the job opportunities are. They don't think in terms of states. All these things with borders, all these places that have borders and that you worry about whether they're on this side of that border or that side. Citizens don't worry about that stuff. Politicians worry about it. People who count dollars worry about it. But today's group do not. We're going to have to do things differently. And for this conference, thinking about how you build a workforce that can respond is very different. We have approached workforce training for 100 years in America from a supply side. But by the way, for the 100 years before that, it was a demand side. When we started building land-grant universities and all those things in the 1800s, it was so we could create supply for our demand that our businesses had for industrial revolution. But since the 30s and 40s, we've always said, how do we get people out of poverty? How do we get unemployed people working? How do we find skills? We've got to do a better job of looking at it both from a supply side and a demand side. What is it that businesses need to grow and prosper? As a bit, I'll ask you at lunch, when you're talking at your tables, if you're educators, you're other people, ask your business what it is they'll do if they can't find enough people. They'll leave. They'll move. They'll buy that $12 billion machine that does all that work. They'll do something, or they'll go out of business. But it's not a choice. So we have to look at the demand side. We've got to figure out, how do you find just-in-time talent? How do you drive job growth? How do you reduce costs, minimize risk, maintain profits, get the skills we have? And the system that we keep talking about has to be the middle. And it has to represent both sides. And we've got to stay focused on skills. There are job skills, whether it's a coder or a welder. I'm personally tired of all the welding stories, although I love them. But, there are other jobs. Whether it's a stonemason or a coder or someone who does key entry, there are specific job skills, and most businesses tell us we'll train those. We'll get those. There are work skills, problem solving, teamwork, critical thinking. And we've got to teach those starting at kindergarten, preschool, all the way through. And then there are life skills, or for some of you have heard me refer to them as skills your mother should have taught you. Those are prerequisite skills. If you aren't going to come to work and you aren't honest and you don't understand that Tuesday's not a day you get to fight with the guy sitting beside you, and Monday's not a day that you get to drink, then you're not going to make it anyway. So we have to have a system that reacts to what's needed. If you need job-specific skills, then our community and technical schools are great. If you need work skills, then we're going to have work experiences that allow people to get those work skills. And if you need life skills, then we're going to have to start from the beginning, because we can't fix those the other way. We're spending a bunch of time right now up in Springdale with Perry Webb and the chamber there, trying to reinvent a workforce system in their community. It's a smaller area, so it's a confined area. We hope to scale that to Northwest Arkansas, and then also make it part of what we're doing for the chamber in Arkansas for Randy and his people. You can't do everything. So how do you spend money to have the biggest impact to make the state as competitive as possible in the short term? That's the real issue. That's what we struggle with every day. Because if we ask all of you to write down a good idea, we'd get a lot of them. But we have austere budgets and we have real needs. So we want to spend our time talking to what is it that educators need in order to meet demand. What is the demand specifically? And I'll tell you, businesses aren't very good at this. It's hard, if you tell us, well, we just need people to show up. Well, if they show up, you need other things. We need you to be a little more articulate about that. And we need to make sure that people are listening along the way. So if I could leave you with one thing, it is that you're going to have a changing place all the time. Every business you have, every group of people who walk in next Tuesday looking for a job are going to be changing. You are going to have to keep an open mind. You're going to have to understand your economy, not just inside your plant or inside your school, but your whole economy. You're going to have to spend more time connecting those dots. And when you do, then we have to take actions. And the legislature and the next governor and whoever it is going to have to take actions to make Arkansas more competitive, because everybody else in the country is taking actions to beat you. And if you don't take those actions, you're not going to win. Thank you. And I'll take a couple questions. Thanks, Randy. Randy, if you want to come up. Come on. I think I got you back on schedule.
That's great. Questions? Here's one right here. Great. Randy?
One of your earliest slides showed the characteristics and the qualities that employers are looking for based on low pay, high pay, et cetera.
Yep.
And I think it was the first 5 were identical.
Yep. First 4, but yes. And then 5 and 6 are like that.
It occurs to me that all those top 5 are things that I learned primarily at home.
Yep.
It was reinforced in school, but the primary educators were the parents in the home. And I'm curious if you're aware of any research or reports that track sort of shifts in the culture as they relate to development of these skills that every job creator wants to find.
Yeah, there's reports that have shown that the earlier children are exposed to education, the earlier that they have early childhood education, the earlier that they have in groups where they can work with other kids, and the earlier you do that, the more cognitive ability you create, the less problems you have. So there are those kind of things. You know, every group we talk to, somebody asks the parent question. So, how do you make parents better parents? Well, I'm an economist. I have no idea. So, I struggled with my own kids, but we're going to have to, any kindergarten teachers in the room? Okay. If you brought a group of kindergarten teachers up, and I'd encourage you to do that next year, put a group of kindergarten teachers up there and have them tell you what their first day is like. What's the breadth of that class? Because they'll have kids who are reading at the 5th grade level in kindergarten. They got Harry Potter out reading it, all the way through. And they have kids who don't know the difference between blue and red. And aren't potty trained and have never been socialized with any other child. And that's their class. And some of them have pretty good sized classes, and they're trying to get all those kids within the next year up to a common level. And it's impossible. And then what happens is they go to 1st grade, and you start measuring, and all the education people in the room can tell you, by the time they get to 3rd grade and their reading scores are a certain level, then the predictability of what happens to them later in life is sad. It's real firm, but it is sad. So we have got to do a better job sort of before 10 to try to get people to the same level. And I'm a big fan of early childhood education, so some people in the room may not be, but I'm a huge fan of that. I'm a huge fan of creating an atmosphere and opportunities for kids before they get to kindergarten, even if that's, recreational things, library things, whatever it is. But you've also got to help parents understand what it is long term that their kids are going to need to be successful. It's hard. That's one of the toughest issues. Other questions? You can ask me a hard economics one if you want. I always get the social questions, and sad. Thanks.
You talked a lot about how workers in the U.S. don't really respect state borders. I was wondering what your views are on changing immigration policy to get the best talent in the U.S.
So I get immigration policy next. Okay, parenting and immigration policy.
That's so easy, Ted can handle.
Do you want the immigration policy question? Okay. So let's start with the fact that nobody asked me to vote on immigration policy. We need a policy in America that has secure borders and generates enough workers to fit the economy. High end and low end. Period. So let's see, which side should I make mad first? Gaza can't build big enough fences or put enough people beside them to keep people from getting from one side to the other. And they've got about 100 yards of it that they can't deal with, a few miles. I don't believe that you can secure a border past a certain point. I believe you can secure the fact that employers, if you don't want employers to hire illegal aliens, tell them you're going to put them in prison for 10 years tomorrow, and they won't hire illegal aliens. At the same time, you can't have a system where you can't get the workers you need, because what happens next is the business just moves to Mexico or wherever else. So immigration policy reform is one of those great political things where both sides get pieces and you can't ever make it work. It's like energy policy. Everybody has to get some of this before you can get it passed. But today's policy doesn't work to keep out illegal immigration, and it doesn't work to allow immigration to meet the economic needs at the time. So it doesn't work. So you have to fix it, and you have to do both. Sorry, that's the Ted Abernathy version of uneducated immigration policy. I apologize. Anybody have an economics question? One more. But if you ask another social question, Randy's getting it. Hi.
Hi, Ted. Rachel Cox, Conway Machine. An issue that's come up this year is the minimum wage increase. What's your thoughts on that?
That one I can do. Okay, so this table right here has 5 people sitting at it. If we raise the minimum wage, 4 of them are going to get more money and 1 of them is going to get unemployed. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's all this question is. Yes, more people get money. Yes, some people don't get jobs. We can argue within the individual, whether it's an individual industry here or there, it'll change the percent of the person who doesn't get a job. But that's the only question. This is one of those public policy questions that is not an answer, it's a choice, which is true of most of them. So yes, more people would have more money. They will spend it all. But America's great from a math standpoint for economics because everybody spends everything. You don't have to think about it. If we give this gentleman $10 more, he's going to spend $10 more. You know exactly what the ripple is. But will there be enough money to keep everybody employed? No. So you'll end up losing jobs. So y'all can decide. How many people think it's better to have everybody employed at a lower wage? Come on, some of you don't like minimum wage stuff, so you're going to vote for that, right? How many of you think it's better to have more people, 4 of the 5 people making a higher salary and the other person has to go look for a job? So that's the problem. So, we tend to argue whether or not the economic math is this or that. Well, the math's pretty easy. The choice is the hard part. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.